Hi guys, welcome to my studios. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do the perfect dovetail. Now for professionals like myself, you can't spend forever faffing around with the dovetails or cutting them, so we've found the quickest and most effective way to do them. So for doing dovetails, you will need a router. You can't get away without one of these. This is a small E-loop 1/4 inch. Does the trick. You don't want a very big router, the smaller the better in my opinion. The next thing you want is router bits. Now I've got a straight bit here for cutting the pins, and I've also got a dovetail bit for cutting the tails. They can be pretty much any router bit you want. You want a mid-size sort of 10 to 15 mil straight bit, and the dovetail bit can be whatever. It just depends on the thickness of your stock as well. The next thing you'll need is some verniers to check depth when you're setting up the router. Next thing you'll need is a steel rule. This is a 300 mil steel rule. Any steel rule will do. Next, a pencil. This is just a 2H pencil, just for rough marking out. Then a knife. This is important. I've just got a disposable snap-off knife. Works very well, but something that you can be precise with works better. The scalpel, the blade's a bit too flexible, but this works a treat. One thing you'll need is a chisel. Now this is to chisel the pins, so a nice sharp chisel is what you want. Now you obviously want the stock for your dovetails. This is some soft English chestnut, which is what we predominantly use for drawers. It's easy to work with, and that's the main thing. You don't want a super hard timber for dovetails, and I believe it's what was traditionally used for drawers as well. What you'll also need is 2 bits of MDF, which are the same width as your stock you're using for your dovetails. Now these are sacrificial pieces. They don't have to be the same length, but they have to be the same width. Otherwise it won't work. With this MDF you want to have probably 18 to 15 millimeter MDF. If you go thinner than that, there's not enough to balance on. If you go fatter than that, you're just routing out unnecessary amounts of MDF for no reason. Next you'll need is a clamp, just to clamp it all together when you're routing it. And then a router fence. You can't get away without one of these. It's very important to have a router fence. One very important thing is a right angle block for the pins. Now this here is made up from some solid timber and then with a sacrificial bit of MDF on top, which I'd recommend having a sacrificial bit of MDF. So you can take it off, and when you've done some, you can replace it so it stops your dovetails breaking out if you've got a fresh bit of MDF there. Last but not least is all your PPE. So glasses are a must because the dust goes flying in your eyes, then a mask because you don't want to be breathing in all this horrible dust, and then your ear defenders. I always wear them, and so should you. So first things first, you have to set the depth of the router for your tails. So this is with the Dovetail cutter. You want to set the depth to the thickness of your stock. In my case this is 10 millimeters. Now that the depth is set, what you want to do is get your 2 pieces of MDF and clamp them either side of your tail stock, making sure they are flush along the top and on the front, so when you run the router across them with the fence on, they don't snag. One thing I didn't mention at the beginning was that you will need a vise. This is to put the tails in whilst you route them, and also the pins. Once you've put them in the vise, then I mark out where I want my first tail, well, half tail to be cut. I normally set this about 4 millimeters in from each side. Now that I've marked out my first half tails, I can now set the router to the line and cut my first half tails. Now that I've routed my half tails, I can divide up the space in between and work out how many full tails I'm going to put in my stock. There's no set amount, it's just whatever looks right to the eye. For routing the tails, it is as simple as setting the router to the pencil line and routing away. The one thing you've got to be careful of is balancing the router on top. Make sure you keep a nice even pressure on the router. And just like that, you've done the tails. Now I'm resetting the router and putting a straight bit in order to cut the pins. When setting the router in order to cut the pins, you want to make sure that the depth of cut is fractionally more than the thickness of your material so that your pins stick just proud of your tails. Now that the depth of the router is set, you want to put the right angle block in the vise with the pin board and line the top of the pin board up with the top of the right angle block. Right, so a little pro tip when lining your tail board up on your pin board, make sure you have it just a fraction of a millimetre, half a millimetre over the edge of the pin board. This will make sure that your pins are on the tighter side of things rather than them being loose. So for marking the pins, first of all get your steel rule and flush out the two top edges of the pin board and the tail board, and then make sure your tail board sticks slightly proud of the pin board. Once you've done this, hold down the tail board and with a knife gently mark the pins and let the knife do the cutting here, because if you try and force the knife it will follow the grain and it won't actually mark exactly where you want it to. So with routing the pins, the tip is to get as close to the knife line as possible. This means there's minimal chiselling required. Now chiselling the pins, you want to use a really nice sharp chisel. This means it won't follow the grain and tear it out as you chisel. Set the tip of the chisel in the knife line and then chisel down. Now I use the tip of my chisel to flick out any shavings from the pins. Now you're ready to test fit the joint. It should be tight, but not so tight that you have to hit it on with a hammer. Right, so you've just seen me do one corner of a drawer box in approximately, I'd say just under 10 minutes. Focus. And these dovetails, as you look at them, they're as good as you're going to get. Now, you could argue that the angle of the tail isn't enough, but that's just the router cutter I'm using. You can get router cutters that look like a more traditional tail with a bit more of an angle on it, but that's what we use for the majority of our drawers. This here, as you can see how accurate you can be, you can get it down to a fine art, and you could probably, if you were just doing drawers and you were doing traditional drawers, not drawers on runners, you could probably do from start to finish, machining and everything, you could probably get about, I'd say between 6 and 10 done in a day, fitted from raw timber to fitted drawers by the end of the day. So I hope you like this video of how to do dovetails. Be sure to drop a comment, like and subscribe, and I shall see you in the next video.